everybody, and welcome back to another review from the Modernist Guide for Popular Media. I'm JD, and today I'm going to tackle less of a should you see it or should you not review of the Eternals, the Marvel Disney latest MCU installment. And after about maybe 5 or so minutes talking about what I liked about the film, I think there's a much more important discussion to have right now that a lot of people are going to have to get to at some point soon. And it's not like a be all end all situation, it's not that dramatic, but I think the reason why, because I'm sure a lot of people look at reviews and opinions for MCU films hoping someone will tear each MCU film a new asshole or just continue to defend Disney's, while some would say, vapid and not very committed and cheap inclusion act situation going on, where they're having more uh, semi queer representation, but a lot more ethnic minority representation that is just all for marketing towards leftists who are going to hate it anyways because it's still a billion-dollar company doing it. So, who is this movie for is the question, but the answer is not going to be as cut and dry as people want it to be. Starting off with Chloe Zhao, people should just know her name because she's going to be doing films like this for a long time. Because even though this is an MCU film first, it actually is kind of a Chloe Zhao film, close second. It is still very much like her highly nominated, award-winning film Nomadland that came out last year that had Frances McDormand and tackling just the issues of workers in America being displaced in capitalism, not having a place to call your own, or just being super undervalued. And Chloe Zhao films are slow paced with lots of people talking about the human condition. And Eternals doesn't change that. You should go see Eternals, especially if you want even just a 10% change in the narrative and pacing of an MCU film. It's not spectacular, it's not genre bending, it's nothing like that, and none of the MCU films are going to be. I understand the resentment or hatred of having these mass produced films every year. Now it's like two or three a year, and I get that. And that's a problem to tackle and really discuss. But that doesn't mean you don't have to not enjoy it. Doesn't mean you have to protest it, because it's gonna be, it's wild to me no matter what, that unless it's just purely out of this weird need of not liking Marvel comics but loving DC comics, to slanderize any MCU film and think that the DC Snyderverse nonsense is any better. It's maybe looks different sometimes, and they definitely probably give a lot of their directors more leeway, but ultimately they're still kind of functionally the same as well, just the Warner Brothers standard instead of the DC standard. Before I dive any further, and I need to just bring up some of the actors, mostly because of the points of their character portrayal and how they use it, is going to be important discussing later, and they deserve recognition always. You have Gemma Chan as Cersei, Richard Madden as Icarus, Angelina Jolie as Thena, Selma Hayek as Ajak, Kamal Nanjiani as Kingo, Leah McHugh as Sprite, Brian Tyree Henry as Fastos, and those are really the ones who have philosophical stakes, and the only ones that I'm going to bring up that way. But never sleep on Don Lee. He's from Train to Busan, where I've seen him, but he's a great Korean actor. He's a big badass motherfucker, and I just enjoy his charisma. He's wonderful in this, and he steals the show for me a lot of scenes. There's Lauren Ridloff, who plays Makari. She is a deaf actress, and they use sign language, and that's a really good progressive thing to include, because while we want to just tear down Disney for their bullshit and fake inclusionary feelings, it's still pretty going out of your way to hire a deaf actor for anything, especially when you don't think you need to. And I mean that as in I'm pretty sure because Makari is not only not deaf, but also not a woman or of color or anything like that. So they hired an actor for this role, probably because no one really knows who the Eternals are, anyways. And they let them have that representation. So there is some there. And that doesn't absolve Disney of any of their sins. But if we don't acknowledge some of the important things like that they did kind of go out of their way to do it, then we don't get progress at all. That's just a hard, shitty truth that a lot of people don't want to accept, especially a lot of like, I guess, call them internet warriors. That's pretty derogatory, I guess, but people who just try to get angry on the internet and do nothing else about it. So at least she is there to represent people and it makes people feel good. But, you know, it is still Disney. And you can put that asterisk there all day and it's fine. And another one is Fastos, who I actually really love. Brian Henry. He's my second favorite character, and it has a lot to do with him just being a gay black man while the Eternals are not that. And that is kind of spoiler territory. So now the rest of this video is basically spoilers, and I will try to put a timer on when I talk about less of the movie and more about the significance of how I think we should approach this film. Not to give it like special treatment as much as we need to understand where film is going because Disney has the power to change the way we view movies forever, and they are currently doing that right now as we speak. And it was coming along because of streaming as well, but Disney has the power to do that in theaters, and that's going to be a big deal for the next 5 to 10 years. But really quick about Fastos. So the Eternals are not real. They're not aliens. They're not humanoids. They're straight up 100% artificially created robots. And so Fastos doesn't act like that at all. And I don't think that's a flaw in writing or direction. I think that's because we are beyond the AI question at this point. And Chloe Zhao does a wonderful job of saying, "No, I'm not going to explain it to you. You know what AI is. You know what artificially created people are. And you know that what the big question is, are we even real? Do we even function in that way? And is it okay? What does it mean to be human?" That's the question asked here, and it's an old one. But instead of holding our hand for 30 minutes about, you know, the mind of a robot, we just have to accept and remind ourselves that these are robots, technically, as they argue and debate whether to save the planet at all. And Fastos specifically has a husband and a son, and he acts like a concerned father. He doesn't just act like, you know, him being black and gay is important from a just completely manifested representation. But as a character, it's not like, oh, by the way, I'm black all the time, or by the way, I'm gay. He is a gay black man who cares about his son. And he's originated from being a million-year-old robot. That's the human condition that Chloe Zhao manages to just sneak in subtly, give all disregard of the idea that she has to explain any of that to any of us, and just accept it because that's what humans are. A human can just be a queer black person with feelings. And Fastos does that exponentially well. You have to remind yourself of that, I guess, if you're not constantly of that world or of that mindset, or if you just want to pretend like it's important to remind yourself that he's gay and also black and all, you know, all these things. If you got to constantly remind yourself to understand how big of a deal and how flawless and effortless the writing is for him to just act and be that, because it's another level of otherism, because he's not just in other realistic films where it's about actual humans and we have to deal with that identity of a character. But it's the idea that regardless of him not being human, that is who he is. And he treats himself and everyone around him treats him as he is. So that is, I think, one of the most important parts of identity and human condition in this film, more than almost anything else. And there's a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of really emotionally driven, long speeches and conversations. This is a moral philosophy class of a Marvel film. And Chloe does that a lot, anyways. But because this is a comic book or whatever, and we have Disney's fault. Disney's fault for not preparing for us to accept this kind of film. But there's always some kind of like high philosophy, pseudo philosophy in X-Men and other comics dealing with what makes that allegory work or not. And it's a huge debate. And people of an older generation, ironically, considering comics blew up in the 40s and just continued up and then kind of fell and then got back up to where we are now. But there's just certain groups of mindset in people that all the flashy colors and violence and fantastical made up abilities makes this an inconsequential thing that has no psychological or philosophical merit. And Chloe Zhao is doing her fucking goddamnedest, and I'm going to emphasize that so much. She's trying her best to bring that to the table. And she mostly succeeds. But what from I've seen of really vague one-line reviews off of Rotten Tomatoes, which is the worst way to look at a review. You have to read the whole article, but even then it might feel like a waste of time. That's why they have the excerpts. But the but the lines that are chosen, and I assume they're chosen by the people who submit their work, these lines are so vague and just, it's not an MCU film. It's not good enough to be an MCU film. It's not loud and flashy enough. Doesn't care about the fights. It talks too long. It's boring, which is super funny because I just got done watching a movie called Dune where it's mostly just about philosophical debate and the right way to do things, and it was praised to high hell because it has a better legacy of being an unadaptable novel. But because this came from a art medium of flashing colors and punching, it can't be at that same level. But it kind of is. It doesn't 100% succeed. It has kind of a Game of Thrones vibe of philosophy, and that is part into because both Jon Snow and Robb Stark are in this. So, and but Game of Thrones did a thing that honestly Lost did before that, but there was so much more going on in Lost that people didn't think about. But that was just constant debates of the moral question. And, how do we function? How do we do these things correctly to continue living while others threaten against us? Game of Thrones made it really popular while having all this other stuff going on, but it slowly became more and more and more of a life debate, especially Daenerys's journey, even though that ended like she'd learned nothing from any of those debates, which is sucks. And that's why a lot of people hate the final Games of Thrones season. And so, yeah, I think people should go see it. It's about a 7 out of 10 generally. I think most MCU films are about a hard 6 to 7 out of 10. Not enough of them critique themselves. None of them are stylized differently, so they all feel very homogenous. And if you don't like that, that's fine. But if you have kept watching every single MCU film, even just a mild acceptance of, well, it's a new MCU movie and I want to see it, which is how I feel, you should go watch it. There's nothing wrong with it in that regard. It's still gonna add part more to the ethos and the lore. It's starting a new thing. It really is. And people don't know a lot about the Eternals. And I've seen a couple of people like, no, I've read Eternals comics. This is pretty much cut and dry about what it is. So I don't understand what people are mad at either. And that kind of stuff. And there's actually probably way more people out there than others want to admit who probably felt that way about Doctor Strange or Captain Marvel. But we're getting deeper and deeper into the more sectioned off lore of the Marvel universe of Marvel comics, so we're gonna all collectively know less and less. The Eternals was really the first step. Shang-Chi kind of as well, but there was something about it. I think enough of its adaptation of kung fu films and wuya lore and just people being aesthetically used to movies like that similarly over the past 20 years accepted it a lot easier. But here, in no real way except just like light beats, like if you wrote vaguely on paper, Eternals attempts what 2001 A Space Odyssey did in a completely different, unrecognizable way, but it's still questioning humanity and how far we've come, how much further we have to go, and if we are worth saving ourselves in a lot of ways. That's the big issue. I would actually say that Space Odyssey is more blunt about it. It's more obvious because of the superhero aesthetic and a lot of other busyness in Eternals. They're not allowed to really focus on that as much as probably Chloe Zhao would have preferred. But I would call this 7 out of 10 because they know the formula. And this is more Marvel and Kevin Feige to a lesser or equal extent, whatever. But they know what they're writing and what they want to do. So every single film to me is going to be at least a consistent 7 out of 10. And that brings me to the problem Disney has created, whether on purpose or not, and that is episodic films. Episodic films is what we have now. The Eternal story is both complete and very clearly just a chapter in the huge ass book of Marvel Phase 4 or whatever. That's what it's going to be. And a lot of people said this about Shang-Chi and Black Widow, of course, and I'm pretty sure maybe not Spider-Man, but I have a sneaking suspicion that Thor Love and Thunder and Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness are going to feel very chapter-esque as well. They have huge plans down the road. So these can't be 100 complete film to film. And if you can't stand that, or you think it only can be done on streaming or on television, then, just give up on the MCU. And that's not saying you can't critique it. Like, that's your critique. Okay. But it's going to be slamming your head to the wall for the next 5-10 years, depending on how long we're really going to go with this. And do you really want to do that? I'm genuinely asking people out there who like hate MCU stuff, but like watch them anyways and then complain and then come on and watch videos like mine or probably everyone else's who's way more popular. It's fine. Do you still want to do that? Is that just like the masochist thing in you? And it's not saying don't critique it because Disney has failed in making this a really cool, interesting, rational movement that's going to happen anyways. Disney has always, far back since they started, when Walt Disney, bought up things from other people just so he could have a power and a monopoly on the cartoon industry. But Disney has always been like, this is what we're doing and you're going to like it. Even Kevin Feige says crap like that and it annoys me and makes me want him to shut the hell up. But that's where we are. Marvel movies are now Marvel comics in the sense that each movie is an issue. So if you can wait every month for a new issue and you like that feeling, that's just where you are when you go to the movie theater now, specifically for any kind of comic book film, because Warner Brothers is going to probably try their best to do this eventually. Sony is basically doing it right now on a fast track, and they do not care. They don't care at all. Sony's like, no, fuck, we got all this Spider-Man crap. Everyone's getting a movie. Screw you, Disney. You're not gonna. We have the cards, and it's kind of badass as a multi-million-dollar company can be. It's not a defense as much as like, well, in Disney versus anyone else is the little guy. So in that very specific regard, it's not being like, oh, Sony's the only good. $1 million corporation. No. But when they go up against Disney, I'm going to cheer for Sony. So I think we have our own philosophical question of why do we go to the freaking movies? What's the point? And if we go there and it's to have a solid, secluded, cut off 2 hour experience, I really wish that someone brave enough, which won't be Warner Brothers, Sony has tried, and I think they have suffered too much. Paramount's kind of doing it, but now their cash cow is the Fast franchise. But honestly, someone needs to start taking more risks on big budget films that are solid. Like the first Matrix, before it got its sequels, has that feeling. And I am struggling with something like that since. I would dare say There Will Be Blood probably had that experience for a lot of people and it made a lot of money, but it wasn't supposed to be made as a big blockbuster event. It just kind of suddenly had that feeling. That was completely by accident. And we've keep having these retreads instead of trying, like they redid Ben-Hur, which is an awful idea to redo Ben-Hur. It's like redoing Lawrence of Arabia. No one wants that. And then we keep doing it's mostly Greek episodic crap. Like Gods of Egypt was awful, but that was supposed to be what that was, and it's not good. But that film experience, that seclude, I'm going to the movies and I'm going to watch a film by itself and get that feeling. That's just all on stream now because the best stuff is not American right now. It is Korean cinema, Japanese cinema if you really want to dig for it. There's some stuff up in Europe where it gets kind of crazy, and that stuff's a lot of fun and original sometimes. But that's where we are. And Disney has done it, and it's Disney's fault, and they didn't prepare or make it acceptable, really. But they have changed it. Episodic films is the new format that has replaced the traditional sequel, and it's just going to keep going and going. And if that sounds stupid and exhausting, then, like, yeah, man, ignore MCU. You don't have to be part of it. And that's not a, like, get over it and go away. That's, like, for your own health. Absolutely, like, for your own health. You don't need to be a part of the MCU if you can't deal with it. I have recently stopped watching something that I've been watching since I was a teenager. I like wrestling, and now, though, a lot of wrestling is exhausting because it's this continuous void of bad changes I don't like, so I stopped watching it. And in a lot of ways, comic books have always been artistic wrestling, clearly. And just read the comics then, Read comics, read comics. Doesn't have to be Marvel or DC either. But like if you want a better kicks, then like just ignore the films. They're worth ignoring as much as I think they're worth watching. It's about dead even. So it's just up to you whether you really care enough to like exhaust yourself in thinking that this form of storytelling is bad, or just accept that it's a new thing that you have to like get up and drive to go see one episode of this 20-year 40 episode series, because that's what it is. And I think The Eternals is worth watching. I think Chloe Zhao did her job, and people decided that that was the wrong job. And that's dumb, and it's showing that a lot of traditional film critics are not accepting of the format that these directors are actually doing very well with and figuring it out and doing a good job and deciding like, oh no, it's just the sterile evil Disney model that waters down their abilities. And that is a very, very hard yes and no issue. The yes being kind of, yeah, they are stopping them from going full on, but the no being like they're still actually being challenged to figure out how to make it work this way. And you want to call it sterile, fine, but I'd like to see any kind of massive corporate film industry like Disney or Warner Brothers or Pixar or Paramount or Sony who don't actually kind of have their own production style of movie making. Fox had it too, honestly. I think a lot of films you could look at and go like, "Oh, this was made by Fox Productions. Oh, this was made by Warner Brother Productions." And indie films where it's at, where if you don't want that, the period. So it's a hard thing of, are we critiquing the industry, or are we shitting on people who do their hardest and tell them it wasn't good enough because of all the bogged down standards? I think not enough people defend Chloe Zhao and the things she had to do to make the Eternals what they were. And I think the same goes for Destin Daniel Cretton from Shang-Chi. I saw a lot of people criticizing how fake it felt for them and how it wasn't like a real kung fu movie. That's freaking awful. And that's not enough of blaming Disney when they got all the right people. They got all the right direction and choreography, and they did everything right. But your problem is Disney has all this money, so yeah, it probably could have looked better. Or you've convinced yourself that just because it's Disney, that it's not authentic. And that is an insult to every writer, director, production team, crew, and actor on those sets. And you don't even have to watch the freaking movie. But don't say that it's inauthentic just because it's Disney. Because Disney didn't make it. Disney told people to make it. And they told them, don't do it this way, don't do it that way. But they didn't actually make it. It's different. Like, I can't look at any MCU film and think that they are as bogged down and sterilized as all the live action remakes that we have of classic Disney films. That's a bigger issue. But they're not the same issue. And I don't think we should compare it to, because Disney is so stupidly, unfairly massive that their problems between what's making Marvel work or not work, what's making Star Wars work or not work, and what's making Pixar and Disney classic films work or not work are all separate. And it's easy to criticize this massive, oppressive, nonsensical industry of Disney, but we really need to start looking and caring about what is achieved by people like Chloe Zhao and Creighton and Coogler and other directors who have worked their ass off for the films that they were given. And that's all really I have to say. And it's kind of a soapbox, and I apologize because, like, it also doesn't matter if you agree with a single thing I said, because this is gonna, movies are all gonna make like millions and millions and billions of dollars anyways, and Disney's unstoppable, and that sucks. And fuck Disney. Just so I say that now, in case anyone wants to like think I'm shilling, which is dumb and also just silly internet stuff. Should probably cut this part. This is dumb too. It's a good movie. You should watch it. Thank you. Like, share, subscribe if you want. It's fine. I'm just doing this because I don't, I have nothing better to do and I like it. And it'd be cool if some people, ended up thinking that I'm doing a decent job. And thank you for everything, for watching this far, especially this far, this very moment you're still watching. Thank you. And have a great night.